Good morning, everyone. So today is Friday. We're going to have a fairly short class today, so that's exciting. Um, don't forget, today you will be taking your quiz, with the exception of three students. Let's see, we have one. There's one. One. Look up. There you go. Hey, do not take your quiz today. Christopher Simon, do we have him in here? Christopher.
Ma'am.
Oh, there you are. Yes. Okay. You don't take your quiz. And Jacob Sperry. There's Jacob. Okay. So Christopher, Juan, and Jacob, you three do not take your quiz today. Everybody else is going to take it. And then you three are going to take it live on Monday morning. Okay. We got it? We all
Yes,
got it?
ma'am.
Okay. Excellent. All right, so today we are going to pick up where we left off. We'll do kind of just a brief overview of what we talked about this week. Do we have any questions before we get started? No questions? All right. Okay, so this week we are talking about drug offenders, and we started the lecture off by talking about the war on drugs and the effect that that has had on drug offenders. We talked about some of the collateral consequences that are caused by the harsh sentencing of nonviolent drug offenders, the disproportionate enforcement, and I gave you the reading from the excerpt from the new Jim Crow, as well as the introduction to Judith Gristle's Never Enough, so that you can kind of compare and contrast their experiences. Then we talked about drug courts, the need for them, the components of them, which should look very familiar to you based on the other therapeutic jurisprudence courts we talked about. We talked about the effectiveness of them, that they are moderately effective, that most of the studies show that they reduce both recidivism and drug relapse. Then we started talking about the different treatment modalities. So we talked about detox, how that can be given with or without the assistance of drugs. But in general, what we're talking about here is just having a medical professional monitor you while you get the drugs out of your system, so that this can be done safely in case you either go into cardiac arrest or become severely dehydrated or begin seizing. Then we talked about methadone maintenance, which is a synthetic narcotic that is capable of reproducing the same effects as heroin. It is another way to detox off of heroin a little bit more safely. Basically, they just sort of taper down the amount of the methadone that they're giving you to get it out of your system in a healthy manner. So the studies on this have been a little bit mixed. Most have shown that this can be effective while they are in treatment. But if they leave the program and then don't continue with that treatment, then they're going to wind up right in the same boat. So detox and methadone maintenance are used to treat the physical dependence of drugs. And it is recommended that the person also seek counseling to deal with their mental addiction to drugs. If you don't do those two together, it's not going to work really well. The other thing to note is that detox and methadone maintenance are not usually offered in an incarcerated setting. Again, there are some exceptions to that rule. Mainly, the detox is offered, detox and methadone can be offered in a jail setting because that's short term. Someone that's been to prison has already been in jail for a period of time, at least given a little bit of time before they were let out on bond. But once you get to prison, it's unlikely that you will need these. But if that is a requirement, you can make adjustments ahead of time to make sure that you're continuing with your methadone treatment, or that you can receive the medical intervention that you need if you have developed a severe drug addiction. Then we talked about outpatient drug-free programs, but keep in mind we're cramming like thousands of types of treatment into one heading. Outpatient just means that you are not living in the facility, that you are physically going to a doctor's office. So that can be offered in the community. You are either driving to the doctor's office, or you can do it through Zoom. It's some sort of counseling. If you're in an incarcerated setting, you're just living in the general population and walking over to your therapist's office for individual or group counseling. 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times a week. It really varies. But sort of the theory and the methods that different therapists use to achieve this sort of helping you understand the life circumstances that led you down the path of drug abuse, those vary widely. But for our purposes, outpatient just means you do not live in the facility. It's not a residential treatment center. So we're going to pick up here and we are going to talk about the other side. So we're going to talk about a residential treatment program that is available for people that are incarcerated. So therapeutic communities, this is a general term referring to residential-based self-help drug treatment programs. So the therapeutic communities partially isolate the drug-dependent offender from the rest of the inmate population. So unlike an outpatient drug-free, this person, instead of living in the general population, they are in a separate wing of the prison, and all of the people in the therapeutic community are living together and working on their drug addiction together. So most of the time when you go to a prison, there are several dorms or wings that, so several buildings on the prison ground. And so this would be one of those buildings, would be just for people in a therapeutic community. So by isolating them from the rest of the population, this increases group pressure to commit to the program and decreases peer pressure outside of the group to maintain the lifestyle associated with drug abuse. So again, remember, part of the goals of the therapy for dealing with your mental addiction is to both understand why you started doing drugs in the first place, and also to make steps to improve your lifestyle so that you don't fall back into that hole. So what they're trying to do here is have these people living together where they're not, feeling peer pressure from the other inmates that, might be pressuring them to continue with that lifestyle, or even to use the drugs that can be available in a prison. That is very common to see drugs in an institution. Either someone that works in the institution is smuggling them in, or they are able to cheek a Suboxone or other type of medication. So other types of legal drugs, like if an inmate is legally prescribed Adderall or Xanax, they can cheek that and then sell it to other inmates. Or you can see it smuggled in, through a drone or thrown over the fence in a football. There are a lot of ways to get drugs into an institution. So they are available, which is partially why the therapeutic community wants to isolate these offenders from the rest of the general population. So these are also premised on the belief that effective treatment for drug abusers has to occur in a 24-hour residential living environment. It's really assumed here that stable recovery from drug addiction depends on the successful integration of a variety of social and psychological goals. So some of the goals of the therapeutic community are to change the lifestyle of the drug addicts to help them remain drug-free once they are released from prison. They're hoping to eliminate their antisocial activity. They're hoping to increase their employability and instill pro-social attitudes and values in them. So some of the programs so while you're in a therapeutic community, you're receiving a lot of treatment, both individual group therapy for your drug addiction, but they're also giving you classes on your GED or getting vocational classes, right? So it's kind of like a two-pronged approach. We want to help you understand why you started doing drugs in the first place, but also change your lifestyle and change your circumstances so that once you are released, you can live a different lifestyle than the one that led you down the path of drug abuse before. So most of these programs are characterized by a very strict hierarchy and insistence on rigid adherence to norms. So there are several different types of therapeutic communities that you can implement in your own institution, but a lot of them have phases that you can move through. So generally what you see here is several treatment phases that involve increasing levels of responsibility. So you start the therapeutic community in phase one, where you're basically just focusing on yourself, you're focusing on treatment. And then once you move up to phase two, you start becoming responsible for other people in the program, and you can kind of mentor them. Phase three, you're mentoring the mentors. So you have increasing levels of responsibility. So you start with a lot of treatment on yourself. And then as you can sort of progress into less and less treatment and more helping other people. So these therapeutic communities are designed to treat the whole person through the use of the peer community, which is why we see increasing responsibilities. We want to see them working together, encouraging them together to stay clean, to get into a better lifestyle. Another thing that's pretty common with these programs is to have ex-addicts serve as the treatment staff. So most of the people that are running this program, that aren't actually the inmates, so the ones actually providing the treatment and overseeing this whole program, the civilians, they are ex-addicts. So it's much easier for someone that's going through this program to relate to the person that's giving them, telling them what to do and giving them their treatment. It's hard for somebody that's never been a drug addict to relate to somebody that is a current drug addict. So some of the things that these guys do in these programs all day, usually they've got morning meetings, either some sort of individual or group therapy. They might have a life skills group in the afternoon. They will have family therapy. A lot of the things that they identify in this treatment is that there were family issues that led them towards drug abuse. So they will have family counseling. They will have educational, vocational training. They will do physical and mental health training as well. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about when we talk about mental health is a term called co occurring disorders. We'll go over this the week that we talk about mental health. But people that have a drug addiction often have a mental illness as well. That's what a co occurring disorder is. It's very, very common to see those two together. So, a lot of times, what we see in these therapeutic communities is also treatment for their mental health. So we have these community norms, this strict adherence to these community norms. They are emphasized and reinforced with clear rewards and sanctions. You're hoping to help this person develop self control and responsibility. Questions about therapeutic communities? Okay. All right, let's start talking about some of the effectiveness of the programs, the modalities that we've talked about. So let's start with incarceration-based treatment. So like we discussed earlier in the week, the two types of programs that are available for drug offenders in prison are either the therapeutic communities like we just talked about, or some form of outpatient drug-free, meaning they have, individual or group counseling. We just have the person that needs this, going to this therapist's office intermittently throughout the week. So most of the research is looking at those two things. So most of the research on drug treatment in an incarcerated setting is looking at the effect of therapeutic communities versus nothing, or the effect of therapeutic communities versus outpatient therapy. Or what you'll see is outpatient therapy versus nothing. So the one kind of problem with this is, like I mentioned, there are several different, with that probably thousands of different types of outpatient treatment that's available, but most of the research just kind of crams it all together. And both, whether it's in an institution or in the community, we'll talk about that on the next slide. Most researchers just look at outpatient, not like individual. So that, we might have family-based therapy for drug abusers. We might have cognitive behavioral therapy for drug abusers. We might have therapy for someone with a co-occurring disorder for drug abusers. If all of those things occur in a non-residential setting, they will all be combined together as outpatient therapy. So that's kind of some of the issues that we have with the research, is that it's for the simple sake of sample size and the ability to do a large scale evaluation. A lot of researchers just sort of put it under the heading of outpatient, and that's their independent variable. But what we have seen from the research is that evaluations have primarily examined, the therapeutic community and outpatient, whether it's like group counseling. And what they have found is that therapeutic communities seem to work the best. When you're comparing therapeutic communities versus nothing, or therapeutic communities versus outpatient drug-free treatment, therapeutic communities seem to work the best. They seem to exhibit the strongest and most consistent reductions in both drug relapse and recidivism. So the other types of research that we see sometimes is looking at like a 12-step program like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. Once you start doing the prevalence section for your policy brief, which basically you have to tell me, does your program exist in all 50 states, and does it exist in South Carolina? That can usually be done with a quick Google search. That's like literally the only time you're allowed to use Google for this project. And this part of your paper usually is like 2 sentences long. But for those of you that are looking, if you're doing a therapeutic community or any sort of drug treatment program in prison as your topic, I'll show you the link to the list of programs available in the South Carolina Department of Corrections. And you will see that more often than not, a lot of these facilities consider Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous their form of treatment in prison. Most experts do not consider that treatment. They all say that that's just kind of like a support system that should go hand in hand with treatment. But sometimes you'll see like outpatient versus, or you'll see the 12-step programs versus, the therapeutic communities. So what we have seen is that the most important aspects of incarceration-based treatment seem to be the therapeutic community modality. Those seem to work best. But if we can combine a therapeutic community with an aftercare component, that also seems to work even better. So aftercare is basically any sort of continued treatment once you've been released into the community. So there's some mixed results about how adding aftercare as a component can be, and that's because there's a wide variety of what we consider to be aftercare. So some therapeutic communities will say your aftercare component means for the next year and a half, you have to go to therapy, individual counseling for 3 times a week. So that's pretty intensive. Others might just say you need to go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting once a month, and you only need to do that for 6 months. So all of that falls under this heading of aftercare, which is why the results are a little bit mixed when we try to look at how effective adding on aftercare is. That's simply because there's a wide variety of what type of treatment we're considering aftercare and the duration that they expect you to go through. But the easiest way to understand this is that aftercare, if we have therapeutic communities plus aftercare, that's usually going to work better than a therapeutic community with no aftercare, because we're kind of looking at the effect of treatment versus no treatment. So you just have to caution when you're always recommending aftercare. Some facilities might recommend, like I said, just go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting 3 times. That's not probably going to add much of an effectiveness. But if you have a longer duration, a more serious type of aftercare component, that is going to be more effective. So that's why we see kind of these mixed results when we look at the effect of aftercare. Most studies will show you, though, that adding an aftercare component is more effective, because any treatment is usually better than no treatment. All right, questions about this stuff? All right. let's talk about effectiveness of drug treatment in the community. So, drug treatment for offenders in the community has resulted from coordinated efforts from some states to divert drug abusing offenders out of the criminal justice system and into community based treatment. So, this was the result of the inability of many criminal justice settings to provide adequate treatment for drug involved offenders. So, like I said, some prisons will have, a highly structured, or a very effective therapeutic community as their treatment. Other prisons just give you Narcotics Anonymous. So, it really just depends on the type of prison that you go to, the funding that they have, and the program that's in place. The other thing that you have to remember is that any sort of treatment you're getting in prison, even if it's the top of the line, the most effective therapeutic community, you are in a prison and you are getting all of those negative antisocial sort of aspects of being in a prison that is reducing the effectiveness of treatment. If you can keep someone in the community to receive their treatment where you don't have those negative influences, it's always going to be better. So treatment in the community is always going to be better than treatment in a prison for a number of reasons. One, you never really know what type of treatment you're going to get in the prison. And two, even if you get the best of the treatment, you still have the negative effects of the other inmates, of the peer pressure, the drugs that are available in prison. So you're always going to get better treatment in the community. The other argument you could make is the quality of treatment is going to be better in the community. So, if you've ever visited a prison or been on a road trip and seen where they exist, they are almost always way in the middle of nowhere. Every time I travel to a prison, the fastest I've made it to prison leaving from Charleston is 45 minutes, and every time I go to prison, I lose cell service. I mean, at least 20 minutes away from the prison. And I know that's going to happen. I have to sort of screenshot the directions before I go because I know I'm not going to have service because it's in the middle of nowhere. So you have to think about the type of treatment provider that is willing to make that commute or wants to live out there. Most of the best treatment providers are going to prefer to live in the city center. So you have the negative influence that you have to counteract for the treatment when you're incarcerated. You never really know what kind of treatment is going to be available in a prison. And even if it's the top of the line, you can probably make the argument that the quality is going to be better outside of a prison because most treatment providers either don't want to make that commute, they don't want to live out there, or they probably don't want to work with a population of offenders and they don't want to work in a prison. So, because of those reasons, that's sort of the rationale why we were trying to keep people that needed treatment, nonviolent drug offenders. That's the rationale that we had for keeping them in the community as opposed to sending them to prison. So, the other thing that we noticed back in the 1980s, when sort of control became the philosophy of corrections, there was a lot of interest towards programs that would require offenders to participate in outpatient drug treatment as a condition of probation and parole. And this became especially popular when it was showed that offenders stayed in treatment longer and did as well as others, even if they were coerced to attend treatment. So prior to this, many people believed that treatment would only be effective if a substance abuser voluntarily joins a treatment program. And in general, this is true. It's sort of the self-selection idea. Those who voluntarily admit themselves to treatment are the ones that are going to be more motivated to change. However, we have a lot of results, a lot of research starting from the 1980s that's shown that treatment can be effective if you're coerced. Again, in general, if you're comparing people that volunteer versus those that are coerced to treatment, you're going to have a better success rate for those that volunteer because they're more motivated to change. But what we realized is that there's not that 100% failure that we thought we would get when forcing someone into treatment. It can be effective. And I kind of always go back to that intervention example. If you've never seen, I recommend that you just YouTube kind of the beginning of it. When you, whenever these people are sort of ambushed and they, they have to go around the room and their family tells them how they've hurt them and how they want them to go to treatment, the person always reacts negatively. They throw a hissy fit, they freak out, they say they don't want to go to treatment. 6 months later, they follow up with them and they're like, oh, yeah, that was probably a really good idea. So, most people that are forced into treatment can actually do pretty well. And if you have to think of the state of mind of somebody that is a drug addict, they're probably not thinking really clearly. So forcing them into treatment, once you get them clean, once you get them into therapy, it can be effective. So we did not realize that we could have a success rate as high as we did when we coerce treatment. So because of the inability of criminal justice systems or the criminal justice setting to provide adequate treatment, combined with the research that shows that it can be effective when it can be coerced, this is why we have started to see sort of this move towards keep trying to divert people out of prison and let them receive treatment in the community. So we started doing that stuff in the 1980s. And since then, we have realized that there have been some problems in finding offenders' treatment spots once they're in the community. So having a probation or parole officer scrambling to find this person a treatment slot was a big complaint of a lot of these officers, right? So if the court is saying, you have 60 offenders that are required to go to treatment, then it's on you to find them a treatment slot. So oftentimes the offenders are not considered preferred clients for these programs, and the treatment centers may have really long waiting lists. So, they had all this great idea to divert all of these offenders into the community to receive treatment, and then they were having trouble getting them slots. So this is another reason why they started moving towards drug courts. The drug courts, when they get set up, will contract with the independent treatment providers in the community to guarantee slots for the people that go into treatment. So that's another advantage of, instead of having your officer sort of scrambling to try to find a spot for this person in treatment, the drug court offenders already have a slot guaranteed for them because the drug court has signed a contract with each of the treatment providers, and they know exactly how many slots they have. So the research. So, like I discussed in the last slide, most of the research about drug programs, outpatient drug-free programs in the community, they cram all of these different, types of treatment that still fit under the heading of outpatient. They all cram them together under one type of outpatient, right? So you might have a researcher that's looking at the effect of outpatient drug-free programs versus no treatment, and they might be looking at 5 outpatient drug-free programs, each with a different type of treatment. So one, you might have like a family-based drug treatment program. One might be cognitive behavioral. Another one might be for co-occurring disorders. You might have like 5 different, one might be psychotherapy. You might have 5 different types of treatment that they're using as their independent variable and calling it outpatient drug-free programs. But overall, what we've seen is that people that are in outpatient drug-free programs, we can see a reduction in recidivism. And it's kind of that idea of any treatment is better than no treatment. So, like I was saying, the programs that they put under this heading of outpatient drug-free, they vary dramatically. So it's difficult to draw conclusions about the specific type of outpatient treatment that is the most effective, or even most effective for which type of offender, right? So we don't know which of these outpatient drug-free programs work best, and we don't know which works best for adult versus juvenile, male versus female, someone that's a straight up drug addict versus someone that's kind of a career criminal. And that's because just the way the research is done, usually it's a sample size issue. If we have these very specific treatment programs that only treat, 20 to 30 offenders a year, it's going to take, almost 10 years to get a sample size large enough to to follow them for 3 years outside of treatment. So for those purposes, we see researchers that will kind of just combine all these different types of treatments that fit under the outpatient heading together, which is why I say, in general, outpatient works better than nothing, but you can't say across the board you can't generalize it to every single treatment program just because of the way the research is done. So you can't generalize it to all community drug-based treatment programs. Some of them work better than others, but in general, outpatient drug-free programs is going to work better than no treatment. All right, questions about this stuff? No questions? All right, so let's see, just a reminder, we've got Juan, Christopher, and Jacob. You three do not take your quiz. Don't do it. Everybody else, make sure you take your quiz before 10 a.m. tomorrow. The quiz will open up in half an hour, and I will encourage you to go ahead and try to get your appointment with me scheduled on the books. I can start taking your one-on-one policy brief workshop appointments next week. If you'd like to get yours done a week in advance, that would be great. That way we can ensure that you get the time that you want. So if you want to go ahead and send me an email, let's try to schedule a one-on-one meeting with me either this week or next week, so that we can make sure that you guys are making the progress that you need. Any other questions before we call it a day? No questions? All right. Well, everybody have a lovely Friday and a nice weekend, and I will see you guys on Monday.
I have a question.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. What's up, Michael?
When you say like this week, do you mean like this coming week or the week after that?
Like this coming week or the week after? Like this week is over. Not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Like.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Have a good one.
You too.